taking the time to speak with us.
Thank you very much.
Okay, you mind telling us a little bit about yourself?
Oh, man. Well, I'm a poet, writer, I guess you'd say, and a political activist. You know, I'm a Marxist. You know, I was born in Newark, New Jersey, 1934. Finally, I went away to college. But, I went to, first I went to Rutgers, Newark, when there was no black people in there. And then I went to Howard University and was thrown out of Howard University after 3 years. Then I joined the Air Force because I was embarrassed to be kicked out of college. And I got kicked out of the Air Force. And I mean, it's just, I was going 2 for 2, actually. And then I came to New York. You know, I started writing poetry really, well, I started when I was a little boy. You know, I had a newspaper when I was about 10. The newspaper had 10 copies that I had to write by hand, and I would pass them out to people in the community. So I must have had that feeling of wanting to communicate a long time ago, early. And I took a writing class in high school, my last year, and in college I started trying to write a little bit. One thing that turned me on, you know, I mean, a lot of stuff turned me on to writing. I mean, Langston Hughes early in my life, at one point even E. Cummings and Pound and people like that. But then when I went to Howard, something happened. I read a collection of Garcia Lorca translated by Langston Hughes called, you know, the Gypsy Ballads, Gitano. And that made me think that I wanted to really be a poet, a writer, because that was the way, and the way Langston had translated it was so beautiful. You know, when you get two great poets like that together, Lorca and Langston Hughes, you get a kind of sensuousness that you wouldn't get otherwise, you know, because Langston spoke Spanish. And then I went to the service, and I was a weatherman in a B-36 bomber. I was a weather gunner. But at night, I was the base librarian. You know, this woman discovered that I had a feeling for books, and I never saw her no more. She gave me the keys, and that was it. She was gone. And I used to be in the library, me and about 6 or 7 dudes, and I ordered all the books, all the records, and we actually taught ourselves the history, I guess, of Western literature, the history of Western music in that library every night. You know, we'd sit in there 3 or 4 hours till it was lights out all over the base. And what we would be doing is talking, reading, listening to music. And that was my real education, I think.
Where were you stationed at the time?
I was stationed in Aguadilla, Puerto Rico.
Is that right?
And that, you know, I mean, that was a very interesting kind of thing because it was like the South of the United States, you know, only they treated the Puerto Ricans like there was the blacks in the South, you know. If you had your uniform on, you could go to those hotels, but the locals couldn't go. This was in Viejo San Juan, you know. But that was you know, it was a good experience for me in the sense I hated it. But at the same time, I taught myself, we taught each other a great deal, you know. Then I got out and I came to New York. You know, I wanted to be a writer then. I came to New York and got an apartment for $28 a month, 3 rooms, no heat. You know, you had to put your feet in the oven to stay warm, you know what I mean? It was New York. My mother and father brought me over to that apartment, man, and they came in with towels and stuff. And when they saw that apartment, my mother started crying. She said, oh my God, my son, what has he done? No, they couldn't understand it, you know, but, you know, I thought it was hip. You know, Greenwich Village, 1957, you know, first time I'm living by myself, you know, trying to write. I got a job the next day in a bookstore, which was a famous bookstore. I didn't know it, Gotham Bookmark, famous bookstore, you know. I mean, I delivered books to famous writers, you know. I mean, that's how, I didn't know what it was. I just walked in there and said, I want a job, it's okay. But, and that's how I got into the New York thing. I had read about Allen Ginsberg in the newspapers in Puerto Rico when the paper, The Village Voice, came out, the first editions. I got those. You know, when Mayor Koch was liberal, when Norman Mailer was on the editorial board, you know, and I'd read about this cow he was having, you know, they were banning the book, you know, for these words. And by that time, I was sending poetry out once a week, and it was coming back the next week. You know, I was sending it out to these journals, and the poetry would come right back with, you know, rejection slips. So when I read about this guy who had written this book, and the police wanted to lock him up, I said, I got to meet this guy. He must be doing something right. That's just before I got kicked out of the Air Force, you know, for... Why did I get kicked out of here? I got kicked out of the Air Force. They said I was a communist. They were visionaries, actually, because I thought I was a Buddhist. You know, I mean, it just shows you they were reading into the future. You know, yeah, the guy said, "You're a communist." What do you mean, man? But anyway, so I came to New York, and that was the beginning of my literary career. I met all those people. I mean, New York in the late 50s and 60s was like no place in the world. You know, like no place in the world. You know, and the world was like no place. I mean, the stuff that was happening all over the world, you know. I mean, to be there in New York at that time. Remember, I came out of service in 57. 58, the Montgomery bus boycott. They blew up King's house. You understand? 59, Fidel Castro. 60, Malcolm X appears for the first time. I'm in Cuba in 1960. SNCC starts in 1960, February 1st, 1960. The Greensboro, you know, sit-ins. The whole student movement begins then. And as a young man then, I'm trying to deal with literature and the whole question of revolution, you know, trying to figure out how you do that. And then a call came one Saturday and said, would you like to go to Cuba to take Langston Hughes' place? So that's the kind of incredible stuff, you know. Some dude said, you want to go to Cuba? Because Langston couldn't go or didn't want to go. I said, yeah, why not? I mean, you know, it's cool, let's go. And that's how I got to Cuba, you know. July 1960, you know, so that's 1 year after the revolution in Cuba. You know, the people still walking around with guns. You know, they brought students from all over Latin America and all these European intellectuals, you know, Simone de Beauvoir, Sartre, all those people, all descended on Havana. And then we took about a 14-hour train ride from Havana to Oriente, you know. And we went up to Sierra Maestra, where Fidel spoke. He spoke about 2 hours that day, maybe 2.5 hours, I swear to God, in the hot sun, you know. But, you know, the question was, that didn't even matter. You understand? And you were transfixed in that kind of thing, you know. Except I was so dry. I wouldn't, you know, needed some water. I didn't have a canteen, you know. I was thirsty. We were sitting out in the sun. You know, the what do you call them? The farmers had those big hats. You know, they was hip to what was happening. But I'm out there with my head, and it's just baking me. So I said, I got to get some water. So then I see these milicianos go up to this faucet coming out of the ground, you know. And, you know, the young militia people, they go and they start drinking this water, man. They drinking this water. I said, great. I would never drink that water, man. I had diarrhea for the rest of the time in Cuba. So I finally had to destroy a paper with my picture in it, you know. Because it wouldn't stop, you know what I mean? I mean, it was some water that they could drink because they, you know, that's their element. Yeah, they're used to it. That's their element. I said, well, you know, they drinking. It's cool. It wasn't cool at all. No, it wasn't cool.
And you got to meet Mr. Castro, correct?
Yeah, I met Fidel that day in Sierra Maestra. I wrote an essay about that called Cuba Libre that won an award, you know, show you the duplicity of American life, you know. I met Che Guevara. He gave us a lecture when we was down there. Juan Almeida, who was the, you know, commandante of the army, a lot of the Cuban poets, you know, But see, I wasn't political. I was becoming, I guess, political. When I got on this train with all these Latin American writers, these poets and stuff, and they were harassing me for 14 hours about America. You know, this bourgeois country, blah, 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 blah. I said, hey, man, I'm not political. I'm a poet. You know, what do you mean you're a poet? Yeah, how can you be a poet and you're not political? So I had to hear that for 14 hours, you know. So every time they would come to one of these little towns, all of the students would say, you know, Viva Cuba Libre, or, you know, Unidad y Lucha, Venceremos, and I would say, Viva 42nd Street, you know, Viva Charlie Parker, because I didn't really have anything to say. You understand? I mean, in the sense of a revolutionary sense. But it's interesting that year, Malcolm X first appeared. That's the first year he actually appeared on television, 1960. So it all came together. Plus, also, Robert Williams was there. You know, Robert Williams, who in Monroe, North Carolina, was head of NAACP, and he was fired from the NAACP because he had led sit-ins, swim-ins. They wouldn't let the black people swim in the pool. They climb over the fence, they swim in, swim-ins. They go to the library, have read-ins. They attacked the Klan. The Klan was marching. They ambushed the Klan and took their hoods off and discovered that they were the state police. But they did that the week after the Lumbee Indians. The Lumbee Indians did it first. And then Rob and them, who was an ex-Marine, they did it. Then the NAACP fired him from head of the NAACP because he said you have to meet violence with violence. In 1958, that was 59, that was out. You couldn't say things like that, you know. You have to meet violence with violence, he said. And finally, he went into exile because they attacked his house, you see. And they wanted to charge him with kidnapping a white couple whose life he had saved, and he fled to Cuba. And the Cubans, you know, gave an amnesty, Fidel, and then later he went to China. But Robert Williams is a great little-known story of the whole civil rights movement. He was one of the first militants, and not just rapid militancy, but actually the confrontation with the Klan, straight out, you know. I mean, I can tell you some stories, but it might be a little too much bad language. But Rob Williams actually took me to the American embassy in Cuba when the Klan was attacking his house, disguised as the state police. It was really, because all they would do is take off their robes and they're the state police. They were attacking. He took me to the Klan. I mean, he took me to the Klan. He took me to the embassy and went to the American ambassador and pulled out a gun and said, MF, you either going to call North Carolina and get them people off my land, I'm going to blow your MFN head off. See, that's who Robert Williams was. You know, and I was standing there as, of course, an innocent bystander. That's what my claim is. I'm an innocent bystander. I didn't know what he was going to do, you know. But Cuba taught me a lot of things. First, that young people actually, if they organized and understood what they was doing, they could make revolution. I understood that very clearly. Because all those people were my age. They were all in 30s. You know, Fidel was barely 40 then. You know, Che Guevara, they were in their late 30s and 40s. They were young people. We were all young people. You know, you can understand that. It wasn't like some old dude or something like that. These were young people. You know, all the poets were young people, you know. These people in their 20s, they were old as I was, you know. So that was why I was so influenced by that. I always say that Malcolm X and Fidel Castro, my two heroes of the 20th century. You know, you have to understand that. When Fidel came to Harlem and met with Malcolm X, which was just one of the shrewdest things that was ever done, because when the people wouldn't let him in down, you know, saying you're too militant. Oh, my beard. So you're too militant to be, you know, we're not going to let you in these midtown hotels. He went to Hotel Teresa on 125th Street. And, you know, he had all the barbudos, all the bearded, you know, army people out on the balcony all the time, and the people just circled Teresa. You know what I mean? Just circled. They'd be sitting out on that balcony eating chicken, you know, and hey, what's happening? But that was like a political coup, you know, and Fidel has done that relentlessly to these people. They're not smart enough to actually do anything. They think they can do something, but they never can quite Even when they get those terrorists, like this guy, Posada Carriles, these terrorists who blow up airplanes, blow up airports, they still can't win, So that was the beginning of my real understanding, Malcolm X, Fidel Castro, that was my understanding of politics in the 20th century, My son just went down to Cuba a couple of times the last years. My wife and I went to Caracas 2 years ago to the conference in defense of humanity. And what was really ironic about that, I was getting beat up then by the press about this poem, Somebody Blew Up America, blah, 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 blah. So when I go to Venezuela, I get off the plane, there's a billboard, big as this goddamn room with my picture on it, what I mean? Myself, Alice Walker, Danny Glover, all in this huge billboard, because we were going down there for this conference. And when I was in the conference, another thing, Chavez is answering questions. He answered questions about 4 or 5 hours worth of questions. We thought we was going to eat at 8 o'clock. We ended up at 12 o'clock. We sat there answering questions. People lined up, kept asking him questions. So a guy comes in the place, and I said to my wife, I said, I know that guy there. I know that guy. I can't identify him, but I know him. So he shook hands, he sat down. And so then Chavez says, and now I want to introduce the great Algerian revolutionary, Ben Bella. And I was sitting behind Ben Bella. I couldn't believe it. Who still looks great, But then I went to the Encyclopedia Britannica because I was writing an article on, the whole visit to Caracas. And there's no mention of Ben Bella. You look up Algeria, the Algerian Revolution, there's no mention of Ben Bella. So all the kids who come up looking for that, there's no Ben Bella in there. They don't know that. They might know about the FALN and, the fact that Algerian revolutionaries overthrew the French, so forth. But you find out more information in the Battle of Algiers, that movie, than you will from the Encyclopedia Britannica. So that's where my politics comes from. I was when Malcolm was murdered, I left the village and moved to Harlem, organized the Black Arts Repertory Theater School, which lasted 1 year. And really, fundamentally, why it split up is because black is not an ideology. We're saying black this, black this, black this. But what black are you talking about? Are you talking about nationalists? Are you talking about Muslim? You're talking about Christian? You're talking about communists? What kind of black are you talking about? You understand? So in the end, it actually ended up people shooting each other. That's how violent that got, But we did some good things. We went to Harlem right after Malcolm was killed. Malcolm was killed in February. We were in Harlem by March. All summer we organized, we had 5 trucks every night going out, and this all through the summer. One truck had music on it, one had poetry, one had drama, one had dance. And we would send the trucks to parks, to vacant lots, to play streets every night. We would move them around, just like Army, we would move them around. And that's how the whole Black Arts Movement spread nationally. The fact that we hammered at it, because our idea was that we had to bring the most advanced art. That why should we reserve what we thought was so hip for downtown Greenwich Village? Why don't we bring that into our community and see what happens? You see, and that has a profound effect. You don't understand how much effect it has. The stuff that they hear on, say, the radio and stuff, what that is. And then if you bring the most advanced artists into, not just what the stations are willing to play, but the most advanced, bring that in there and see, like people were saying, Sun Ra is so out, Sun Ra, nobody could dig Sun. We brought Sun Ra to Harlem and people started dancing. It was out, but they knew what to do with it. They would be dancing. You know what I mean? So that question of no matter how advanced you think your stuff is, go back to the people. See the reaction they have to it. See how they dig it, what they think about it, There's a poet named Tony Medina. That's a famous line from his poem. He repeats, "The people dig it, MF. The people dig it." It's that That is your final judge of what you do, the people. That's your judge. You know, I tell my students, my writing students that all the time. You think you're so hip. You see them dudes digging that hole over there? When they get ready to sit down and have their sandwich for lunch, go over there and read them a poem. See if they'll listen to it or whether they hit you in the head with something. And then you'll find out whether your stuff is strong enough. You know, can you read to them people, them guys with them hard hats on? Try that. You know what I mean? So, naturally, some will, and that's good because it gives them the confidence that what they're doing is worthwhile, you know. I don't know, and some of the other questions we were talking about, if you might talk about that, the whole question of black-brown unity is important to me because in the fabled 60s, which is really a couple of decades when they say the 60s, you're talking about the 60s, the 70s, the building block of all of that civil rights movement and the black liberation movement was unity between nationalities. That's the bottom line. You know, the bottom line was that. So that, for instance, I give you a small instance and a large instance, the same thing. In 1970, you know, and of course, I mean, I could go back further. I mean, the greatest thing that I would say, of course, I'd tell you about Fidel, but if you ever look at the 1961 flick with Du Bois and Mao Zedong in Tiananmen Square, you know, where he says, Africa learned from China. Africa learned from China. That speech, you know, read that speech about the unity of all people struggling. The Bandung Conference, again, that Malcolm was talking about, the unity of the third world people, the unity of the colonial, the people who have been made colonies, that unity, very important, you know. Huey Newton visiting, you know, China. Malcolm X traveling around Africa. You know, these are important things, you know. So that in 71, the racists in Newark, in the Italian section, were burning down these Puerto Ricans' houses, and I told you about that before. We declared a mutual defense pact with the Young Lords. Myself and Felipe Luciano, who's still a close friend of mine, we declared a defense pact. An attack on us is attack on them. Attack on them is attack on us. The racists sent a telegram to the governor asking, was that legal? We said, attack on the Puerto Rican community is attack on the black community. Attack on the black community is attack on... Now, there is 60-some% of that community is black, you know, and at the time, at least 15% was Puerto Rican. Now it's much larger than that. So the idea of them actually seeing all of those people coming after them was enough to make them get off it. And that's what you have to do. You have to see that unity. And so now, you know, another strong, you know, connection we have is a brother named Corky Gonzalez from, you know, Colorado was a strong. And then Tijerina with the land seizures. You know, all of those things, and all of those things are important. But the Young Lords, Black Panther unity was very important. And because of the strength of those movements, you had people like Iwar Kong from, you know, the Chinese national movement, the Red Guards, the Asian national movements, the Young Pioneers, the poor white people's movement. They turned everybody on, you see, because the question was unity and struggle. Unity and struggle. Unidad y lucha. That was the question. And we all knew then, you know, when Mao Zedong said, you know, countries want independence, nations want liberation, and people want revolution. That cry for us was a universal cry. You know, he used to say, that was Mao, used to say, revolution is the main trend in the world today. We love to say that in the 60s. We would always say, revolution is the main trend in the world today, no matter what you say, police, you know, or city council. Revolution is the main trend in the world today. It's not today. Revolution is not the main trend in the world today. The main trend in the world today is what? Neo-fascism, repression, war, you know. So that question of how do you now reverse that, the struggle against imperialism, the struggle against neo-fascism, and one of the things that they're doing is trying to divide the black and brown communities. You see what's happening in at Los Angeles. You see, that's very, very, very dangerous, because the more that happens, the easier both of us can get killed.
Divide and conquer.
That's all it is. And, you know, that's the first lesson if you take Latin. In a book called Caesar's Commentaries, that's the first Latin. All Gaul is divided into 3 parts. Keep it that way. In other words, he's saying when, you know, the Romans conquered France, Gaul, all Gaul is divided into 3 parts. Keep it that way. Maintain that division. So that's, I mean, they tell you that's a long, long, old struggle, and that's what's happening to us now. They're trying to use the Latinos and the blacks to divide them the same way they divided white and black workers, although the white workers have much more racism in them, but still, they would get the blacks to work for less, and then the whites would resent that. They will get the Latinos to work for less, and the blacks will resent that. But the question is, you have to see who's doing that and get them unified and attack the doers of that, not each other. You see, because if you attack each other, you fall into their trap. You know, you fall into their trap. And people say, well, don't you think we need allies? If somebody's beating your head, would you rather have somebody watching it? Join the enemy? Or jump him? You know what I mean? That's simple, it seems to me. If you've been in the street, you know. You know, get that sucker there. But that's where we are now, and it's up to us to fight against that division. It's up to us to fight that, you know, to fight that. You know, like, you know, you mentioned Albert Gonzalez. It's true. If you're with Albert Gonzalez or Condoleezza Rice, you know, they all go when the wagon comes. You understand? I mean, because they do not serve us. There's no ethnic ties with them. They serve imperialism. That's all, you know. I tell you what she said. You know, she said, they asked her, did you think about the civil rights movement? She said, you know, I was in college and I was learning to play the piano. And I never thought much about the counterculture. I said, the counterculture? You mean we the counterculture? I mean your mama and father was the counterculture? No, just us, the ones struggling against. Because, you know, her father was even against Dr. King, Condoleezza Rice, you know. I mean, he lived there. I mean, in, what was that? Where were the Birmingham, where they blew up the church and killed those 4 little girls? She went to the same church. You understand that? But that was part of the black bourgeoisie that was opposed to the king, opposed to them. You see, it's not no simple ethnic kind of connection. It's about ideology and commitment. So then there's people in Birmingham who was against King, black people. But now when Birmingham is desegregated, they benefit too. You understand? She said the civil rights, again, Condoleezza Rice, she said the civil rights movement wasn't really necessary. They let my parents go into the stores on the weekend. I mean, that's outrageous. Oh, that's what you think it was about? Going in the stores? You think it wasn't about equality and self-determination. It was about going in the stores, you know. I saw my grandmother go into a store one time down south, and the lady wouldn't let us try that stuff on. She threw it down. Said, I'm not interested in that. You know? But the clarity on our class divisions within our own nationalities, you know, they're clear. What they call in Spanish, the vende patria, the people who sell the country, you know, what they call the compradors, you know, the people that work for imperialism, who look like you know, what Cabral called native agents, you know. So we have to begin to look for classes and class struggle. And in the 70s, we thought we understood that. The whole left, the new left, was a multinational left, you know. Anyway, if you got any questions, I can answer.
I have a quick question. Recently on the internet, there's an activist that actually came out and started to attack those of us as artists that are trying to use any kind of social issues and change in our lyrics. And his comment kind of sparked a lot of the artists to respond. Do you have any?
What's the guy's name?
I don't know who it is.
Is he from L.A.?
I believe he is.
Yeah, well, he's a fool. Yeah, I responded to him.
Did you? Because I just saw some of my friends that are also artists, because we struggle with that. And
first, I would say it might be the FBI. You have to assume that people that take those kind of positions like that work for the state. You have to assume that. You know what I mean? And that's what I said to him. He wrote me this thing, and I said, "You must be the FBI."
Yeah.
You know.
That's what happened to La Raza Unida here in Texas, also with Tijerina, because he's out in exile in Mexico, and a lot of people have long forgotten the struggle with the land right, Tijerina, which you were talking about. And so some of us are trying to find our elders and go to them, but they have been exiled, especially within the Chicano movement. And so as artists or as anybody that's struggling, what would you say to, especially artists? Because here in Texas, like you speak of, the South, there are still places here that if I drive from here to Louisiana, if I stop, they won't serve me. And it's a very sad and scary thing, but it still exists.
Yeah, well, remember, this is occupied Mexico.
That's right.
I mean, if you want to be clear about that,
Right.
you know what I mean? This is all a sham.
Right, we know that, and we speak about that. But so those of us that are trying to make a change within our music and within our art, what, as long as you've been in all of your experience, what kind of words of wisdoms do you have to us? Because just hearing you this morning just sparked it back inside of me, just to know that I'm not selling out, I'm doing the right thing, I'm defending my people, and I'm really trying my best. But to anybody that might lose focus or hope, especially within hip-hop, because some of us are actually trying to make a difference in the underground, utilizing that tool like that's been taken over by the government, utilizing that movement of music and putting our words into it. Do you have any...
Well, see, first of all, anything that you do, you have to think like escaped slaves. Anything you do. You can't stay there long. You know, you make your camp here, you got to move tomorrow. If you're doing one kind of thing, you remember at a certain point they're going to catch up and they're going to take it over. You know, like Ice-T, he's against the cops today. Next week he is a cop on television.
Right.
I mean, that's what they do. You see what I'm saying? So you have to always understand you cannot stay one place, but you have to create an institutional presence at the same time that cannot be destroyed. You know, like I say, for the Afro-American people, that's 27 cities. You have to find out where do the Latinos in America constitute a significant plurality. You understand, in any of these cities. Where can that network be set up nationally so that you have venues so you can go from, say, Texas to Oklahoma to Colorado to Louisiana, you know, and present your art on programs. And that's very important, that the networking is important. And also that you have alternative spaces to do your thing. The venue is important. The venue. Having a place to do what it is you want to do. That's important. Because if they control all the venues, then you got to get signed off by them before you do anything. You see what I'm saying? And that's the way it is. We live now in Newark, occupied Newark, because they swept us out last May. This guy Booker came in with $6.5 million to become mayor of Newark and swept all the council. My son, my second oldest son, Raz, was a councilman. And that's sad to see counter-revolutionary motion. But the point is, you know, it's like a fight, you know, so you get hit. You got to hit back. It's not the end of the world. You just have to find out what to do. I ain't going to do that no more. You know, I'm not going to drop my left anymore. You know what you have to do, and that's significant. Don't drop your left. We have dropped our left. You know, the left has diminished in the United States, you know. And no matter, the people, it is the people's movement ultimately, but the people have to have some leadership. And leadership that is revolutionary and daring and intellectual, you know. Leadership that thinks and knows, you know. I wrote a poem. I would love to hear the conversation between W.B. Du Bois and Mao Zedong. I saw the picture of them and they're standing there talking and smiling and laughing with each other. I would love to hear that conversation. You understand? These two brilliant men. You understand? I would love to hear what they were talking about and what they thought. I know one thing they said that was recorded is that Du Bois was complaining, saying, you know, I've made so many mistakes. And Mao told him, you haven't made as many as the Chinese Communist Party. You know, to say what? Don't be telling me about your mistakes. You know, we all make mistakes. You know, like Monk said about mistakes, there's two kinds of mistakes. The regular kind and the ones that sound bad. So we all make mistakes. But some of the mistakes is not necessarily negative, you know. It's just things that you have to then learn from. I'm not going to do that like that anymore. You know, and be willing to criticize yourself. That's the essence of intellectual growth. Criticism and self-criticism. to criticize and to self-criticize, and offer the self-criticism first. Always, the self-criticism is first. What did you do to make us black and blue? You know what I mean? That's the first thing, self-criticism. And that's the hardest thing for people to do. Self-criticism is very hard for people to do, but it's necessary. It's necessary, you know.
Yeah, I got one question. The poem that you wrote about the 9/11 situation that got a lot of controversy.
Yeah.
I want to see if you have more insight into that. Maybe there was some stuff that you didn't add into the poem, or just dealing with that 9/11 situation. Because
Well, you know, the 9/11, I spoke on that. I said, you know, the question, I couldn't understand why they would get so uptight. I mean, I didn't even have a question about. First of all, it wasn't even about Jews, except the part that I said, who killed the Jews in the ovens, you know. But when you mention Israel, they got excited, because first, what I was saying is that the Israelis knew that the attack was going to be made, but so did the British, so did the French, so did the Chinese. You know, I mean, they warned the United States repeatedly. They've said that, the Russians. And what the Israelis did was simply warn their nationals. You know, I didn't say Jews, I said Israelis. Why? Because there's more Israelis working in that World Trade Center, you know, the largest third largest shipping company in the world, you know, American Israeli Shipping Company. All those companies function out of the World Trade Center. That's why they call it the World Trade Center. You understand? Because it has the people, the nations of the world in it. And if you want to find out, to show you the hypocrisy, you can go to the Wall Street Journal and find out who the tenants of the World Trade Center was, 911. You can get the tenants. And how many numbers? How are they? Who was in there? And you'll find out. You understand? How can more Australians die than Israelis in the World Trade Center? How come more Jamaicans die in the World Trade Center 911 than Israelis? You know. But how do you cover yourself? You say Israel, they say Jew. I said, I wasn't talking about that. American Jews die with us. Even a fool knows that. Anybody that was in there died. What I'm talking about is how did them people who wasn't there get warned? You see? And that's not a dirty question. That's a question that tells you the function of nations is to warn their nationals.